The story begins by introducing Kotarou, who lives alone in an apartment. One day, he goes to the supermarket with plans to buy premium tissues. While shopping, he impulsively buys a toy sword to resemble his favorite samurai anime. After purchasing the tissues, all that's left is to write the apartment owner's name on them. However, he suddenly hears a loud noise coming from the neighboring apartment. The man in there is named Karino, who is having a heated argument with his girlfriend, resulting in a breakup because Karino can't change a light bulb. A moment later, Kotarou introduces himself and offers some tissues to break the ice with his new neighbor, Karino. Although he initially didn't care much about his new neighbor, after seeing a news report about a kidnapped child, Karino ends up accompanying Kotarou for a bath and helps clean him up, something Kotarou hadn't experienced in a while. As they chat, they discuss Kotarou being allowed to live alone as long as he pays the apartment owner, and Kotarou also inquires about Karino's parents. Since then, Karino is determined not to let Kotarou feel lonely or isolated. The next day, when Kotarou goes out, Karino unexpectedly follows him to the supermarket, where they accidentally meet Mizuki, who turns out to be their neighbor as well. At first, they are mistaken for a father and son, but it's just a misunderstanding. To clear things up, Kotarou firmly states that they are not related in any way, also apologizing for Karino mistakenly being thought of as his father. As a result, their neighbors start feeling guilty for assuming Kotarou was living alone as a lie. As they initially enjoy their time together, Karino suddenly receives a message from his girlfriend, asking for money, which stresses him out. Meanwhile, Mizuki falls asleep in front of their door. In a hurry, Kotarou goes back to the supermarket, with Karino accompanying him. While walking, Kotarou stumbles but refuses to cry. He buys a cold drink and mentions it's for soothing swollen eyes after crying. He reassures Mizuki that he won't hate her, even though she often cries. In the adjacent room, Karino is visited by his comic book editor and experiences sudden back pain. At the same time, Kotarou arrives and ends up helping Karino, who, in return, draws Kotarou's favorite anime character. It's the first time Karino sees Kotarou genuinely smile, which should be normal, but is a rare sight. Not long after, another neighbor named Tamaru comes over, wanting to play with Kotarou. It seems that Kotarou doesn't like being touched, but Tamaru insists and takes Kotarou to his room to give him a samurai doll. Kotarou accepts the doll but returns it when he hears that it was meant for Tamaru's child, who lives with his ex-wife. Kotarou doesn't want to take something that belongs to someone else. He also briefly doubts Karino's sincerity about the knee drawing, but eventually realizes Karino is genuine, and he acknowledges that. It's actually strange that Kotarou likes this samurai anime, maybe because it airs late at night and isn't very popular on the internet. This is explained while they are taking a bath, and there's a child throwing a tantrum with their parents. Kotarou approaches them, wanting to talk, and he appreciates that there are still parents who engage with their children, unlike him, who is often left alone until late, only accompanied by the samurai anime. This is why Kotarou likes the anime. But now, he's grown up and should be a responsible adult, even though his clothes are on backward. Sadly, the samurai anime is ending soon, and Tamaru is also worried about Kotarou. Karino is concerned too, especially because the anime holds a special place in Kotarou's heart, and he fears he might get very sad. However, Kotarou starts selling things on the roadside. The reason for his attachment to the anime is that he used to watch it with his mother, but now he's alone on the final episode. Unexpectedly, his neighbors visit him on purpose to keep him company, and it brings a small smile to Kotarou's face. Unfortunately, the smile quickly fades because the public bathhouse is closed. This isn't the only issue. The next morning, when taking out the trash, Kotarou keeps his distance from Karino and acts like he's trying to maintain a safe distance. In the following days, things worsen, and even when paying for groceries, Kotarou avoids getting close to anyone, because he hasn't taken a shower for 2 months. Eventually, Kotarou returns home early, and Mizuki witnesses this. She assumes Kotarou has a trauma and is disliked by people because he doesn't shower. Luckily, they find a temporary solution by filling the sink with warm water. This way, Kotarou can still clean himself without being disliked by the neighbors. As a result, Karino becomes more understanding of his young neighbor. When Kotarou can't sleep and wants to ask Mizuki to accompany him, he feels too embarrassed to do so. As a result, Kotarou sleeps less, and his dark circles become more prominent. But Mizuki is attentive and invites Kotarou to stay in her room. Strangely, Kotarou still can't sleep. He later tells Karino that he couldn't focus on sleeping next to a beautiful woman. Initially, Mizuki wanted to invite Kotarou to stay in her room, but when they meet again the next day, Kotarou is already sleeping soundly, wearing a samurai costume. The next day, Kotarou had quietly left without wanting Karino to follow him. And when his neighbor insisted on joining him, Karino was left alone, even though Kotarou was also alone amidst people with their families. They claimed to be Kotarou's parents, but in reality, they weren't his parents. However, on the first day of kindergarten, it became apparent that they were concerned neighbors welcoming the new students. At that moment, they hurriedly gathered around Kotarou. Kotarou was pleasantly surprised to see such kind people who cared about him. And so began Kotarou's beautiful kindergarten journey, although packing his lunch was his own responsibility. When he saw his classmates with cute lunches, he thought about his own plain one. Initially, Kotarou thought it was okay, but after seeing other kids with different lunches, he had the idea to ask for advice from these kind people on how to make his lunch more interesting. The lunch took on a slightly different form this time, but Kotarou was actually happy because it was special to him, especially since it was prepared with the help of these kind people. Kotarou also got a balloon from a man who was giving out balloons, but he could only got one. As a result, Kotarou changed his appearance just to get more free balloons. He initially had negative thoughts about the man, but after leaving, Kotarou approached Karino to ensure that everyone had balloons. Unintentionally, the balloon man saw Kotarou playing with the balloons, which had messages written on them from his father, mother, and siblings. This was one of Kotarou's ways to alleviate his loneliness. The man hoped that the balloons would last a long time, or at least that Karino would be there to keep Kotarou company. The next day, Kotarou accompanied Karino to meet his editor. They continued to discuss Karino's comic, which the editor felt was lacking in certain aspects. The editor was asked by Kotarou to draw a comic, and this made Karino panic. He asked for a moment to go to the bathroom, hoping to convince the editor not to be too harsh. The editor was aware that Karino had potential, but he believed that Karino needed to be motivated, and one way to do that was through the editor's critical feedback. Returning from there, Kotarou explained the reason for accompanying Karino today, as a way to repay Karino for always being there for him. On other days, Tamaru also took turns accompanying Kotarou, because Kotarou had plans to buy new clothes to become popular. Shortly after they arrived at the store and started choosing clothes, Tamaru attracted the attention of the security, because he seemed suspicious, even though Kotarou was just enjoying watching him mix and match outfits. Initially, Tamaru thought Kotarou had a girlfriend and wanted to look cool, but in reality, Kotarou wanted to become popular and be liked by others. Suddenly, Tamaru offered some advice, saying that no matter how stylish Kotarou became, there would always be people who disliked or talked about him. Regardless, Tamaru would continue to like Kotarou. Unfortunately, another misunderstanding occurred, but this time Kotarou defended his neighbor. Still talking about his neighbors, Kotarou visited Mizuki at her workplace. He immediately informed Karino so that he could pick him up. In the end, Kotarou was sent home, but not before being asked to pay. The confusion continued when Kotarou returned the next day. He had intentionally come to be with Mizuki, as a few days ago, she received a call from the apartment owner, indicating that the lease was ending. Initially, she wanted to renew it, but Kotarou suddenly left and sought advice from Karino on how to stay with Mizuki. And Karino simply advised him to go to her workplace. As a result, Mizuki understood what Kotarou wanted and assured him that she wouldn't go anywhere. The next day, they all went on a picnic in the park and enjoyed ice cream. Kotarou wanted to take a photo, but it resulted in him headbanging. They chased him for photos, but he adamantly refused to be photographed. Kotarou also had covered his face on the first day of school, and it seemed like there was a dark story behind his actions. When Kotarou was living in an orphanage, his father suddenly appeared, angry after seeing a photo of his son hiding there. And that's the reason Kotarou didn't want to be photographed again, even though the memories of the picnic were precious. Fortunately, his neighbors were kind, and they gave Kotarou a drawing of their picnic as a substitute for a photo. The drawing was wonderful, and it brought a smile to Kotaro's face. Moreover, they were expecting a visit from a lawyer. Throughout this time, Kotarou managed to live and have money from an insurance policy from his mother. However, Kotarou didn't know where the money came from or who gave it to him. The only thing he knew was that he had to perform in return for this assistance. After that, the lawyer gave Kotarou some money, and in return, Kotarou also gave something. At each meeting, Kotarou asked who had helped him, but the lawyer couldn't reveal the truth, specifically that this money was from his mother's insurance. The lawyer could only say that there were kind people who donated for Kotarou. Kotarou had a feeling about who helped him, because the items he gave were related to his daily life, such as his height, weight, or daily activities. As a result, the lawyer was just as enthusiastic as Kotarou, who lived alone. One afternoon, Kotarou invited his friends to go fishing. Although initially hesitant, Kotarou eventually succeeded in fishing. Kotarou also taught them how to cook, preparing ingredients as seen on TV programs. Kotarou also wanted to teach them that as young children, they couldn't always depend on adults. Thanks to this, Kotarou's friends realized that they needed to become more self-reliant. They asked Kotarou not to hesitate to contact them if he ever felt lonely. However, the next day, one of the kids had a nosebleed after failing to catch a ball. They started practicing, and catching the ball was likened to communication. But Kotarou then refused to throw the ball anymore because Kotarou had a traumatic experience of showing a picture to his mother, and it went unnoticed. And he was afraid that his friend wouldn't accept the ball. Immediately, Karino said that his mother accepted what Kotarou showed her, even though there was no response in return. As a result, Kotarou became more enthusiastic about playing catch. They also celebrated Kotarou's birthday with a party. Kotarou wasn't sure if his presence in the world was a good thing, but thanks to his neighbors, Kotarou began to feel grateful and practiced proper breathing to blow out the candles. However, Kotarou suddenly disappeared with his birthday cake, only to take it to the field to celebrate it with the cats. The next day, Kotarou was invited to run away by a friend who was often scolded by his mother. They went shopping and played at the playground. Kotarou then claimed that his parents were ninjas, and no one was waiting for him at home. When his friend left Kotarou, he became sad about the situation, even though Karino had been looking for him, and in the end Kotarou apologized for making him worry. On the other hand, during a parent meeting, Karino was considered incapable of taking care of Kotarou. On their way home, they were also gossiped about by some neighbors there. However, all misunderstandings were eventually resolved, and the school festival organized by Karino was a huge success. All of this was done to see Kotarou's happy face. However, behind all of Kotarou's happiness, there was a sadness he kept hidden. It turns out that Kotarou often used premium tissues, usually used by adults rather than children's tissues. Karino realized this after learning about someone who had eaten tissue as a child because they were abandoned by their parents. Karino then cautioned Kotarou not to eat tissues anymore, and Kotarou understood his neighbor's well-intentioned advice. The scene then shows Kotarou eat alone, but his table was filled with food. At the same time, his neighbors came to deliver flyers and unintentionally saw Kotarou's dinner. They planned to visit the next day to taste Kotarou's cooking. On the other hand, Mizuki was delighted and asked Kotarou to cook. Meanwhile, Karino was puzzled with Kotarou that cooked in such large quantities. On the following evening, they gathered in Kotarou's room. They sat in the places that had been prepared. Shortly after, Kotarou finished cooking and brought out only one type of food, and everyone was surprised that there was only one type of food. But Kotarou explained that this menu was made with all his heart, and it tasted delicious that suited all tastes. So Kotarou no longer needed to make a variety of dishes to accompany his dinner. The next day, Kotarou's teacher had a problem, but as a teacher, she has to always smile in front of the children. Seeing this, Kotarou had an idea to ask for the role of a smiling son in next week's event, even though he rarely smiled. The teacher hesitated if Kotarou can take the role, but suddenly, Kotarou steps forward and smiles. The teacher is surprised, and Kotarou continues to smile, faces the teacher. As far as Karino remembers, the last time Kotarou smiled was when he drew a samurai anime. Kotarou's teacher is pleased to see her student full of smiles. The teacher then asks Kotarou to smile more genuinely, But Kotarou responds that he can only smile when he's acting, similar to the teacher. As it turns out that Kotarou realizes that the teacher always forces her smile. Finally, the teacher thanks Kotarou for the reminder and promises to do better. The next day, Kotarou meets with his old friends named Ryota, who used to be in the same orphanage. Ryota, who now works as a laborer, came to the summit because he had promised Kotarou to see the stars. Ryota is glad that Kotarou still remembers their promise to enjoy the beauty of the universe. When they ran away before, Kotarou accidentally took his friend's camera, but Ryota wasn't angry. Ryota knew that Kotarou wanted to keep beautiful memories of their time at the orphanage. They'd also hoped to create beautiful memories from the beauty of shooting stars. The next day, Kotarou visiting Karino's editor to replace his neighbor who fainted due to a deadline. The editor could have gone to Karino's place. However, that day was a Sunday, and the editor was still working. Kotarou then asks when the editor got married, as he is already married and has a child. Kotarou then takes a comic script and asks the editor to go home and be with his family. The editor then intentionally takes Kotarou around the office to make the child happy, just like the other kids. Fortunately, after returning from Karino's place, Kotarou asks to be taken around again, but not on Sundays. If the work is finished, they can go shopping and try delicious food. Kotarou keeps buying continuously until he ends up buying products offered by a pregnant woman. It turns out that Kotarou is worried about the condition of the pregnant woman's stomach, because the pregnant woman has to eat all the products from the products not sold out. Seeing the pregnant woman made Kotarou wonders if he is loved by his parents too. All Kotarou can do is to leave his daily journal with the lawyer. The kind person knows how he's doing. In the afternoon, there's a new neighbor named Ota who will stay for a month. He then asks to be Kotarou's friend because he easily feels lonely. Therefore, Kotarou's daily routine with Karino will be replaced by the new neighbor. They do various activities together, from enjoying baths, savoring their favorite snacks, to listening to the sound of a frying pan being hit by raindrops. Ota then asks Karino about Kotarou's daily activities and wants to hear stories about Kotarou's parents. Kotarou refuses to answer and feels disturbed. As it turns out, Ota is a detective sent by Kotarou's father to find out where he lives. Kotarou is not suspicious, but other neighbors start to doubt and investigate Ota's intentions. Tamaru, who has a lot of experience, gives money to the new neighbor to make him talk, until they reveal that Ota is a spy sent by Kotarou's father. They also wonder if such a young child can live alone, take care of himself, and be happy even when alone. Before the situation gets hotter, suddenly Kotarou comes to help Ota against the neighbors. The detectives talk about Karino living alone makes Karino dizzy, but there's nothing he can do. Kotarou wants to be closer to Ota, even though he knows that Ota's intention is to report back to his father. In the following days, Kotarou asks to go to school together as he had promised Karino, but the real reason is because Ota is gone. Tamaru is informed in a hurry, and luckily Mizuki is there, so they keep watch outside the kindergarten. They are worried that Kotarou's father might come there, so they with Kotarou all day. Until finally, Kotarou gets fed up and in reflex, he does 100 sit-ups to avoid being seen as weak. A few days later, Ota returns and is warmly welcomed, and with Kotarou, they talk in the park while watching other children. While they're talking, Kotarou's friend suddenly cries. Kotarou then tells the other child not to cry and to be strong. Kotarou also thinks that he needs to be strong so that his father won't do bad things, so they can live together again. Finally, Karino challenged Kotarou to a running race and Kotarou won. Karino intentionally provoked Kotarou to make him his rival, so it would be easier for him to become strong. The adults knew that this wouldn't improve the relationship between Kotarou and his father, but at least Kotarou would become physically and mentally strong. Nearly a month passed, and it was time for Ota to leave. Unfortunately, a great disturbance occurred when Mizuki's underwear suddenly disappeared, and the detective demonstrated his abilities. He not only showcased his deductive skills but also managed to find the missing item in Karino's place. Everyone immediately accused Karino, but Ota didn't believe it. According to him, it was the work of the mischievous cats, so Mizuki's belongings could have been moved. Ota's deductive skills were impressive, But to Ota, they were just skills to deceive people. Shortly after, Kotarou reported to the detective that a box in his room had disappeared. Ota saw ink stains and suspected Karino, but he also smelled women's perfume and suspected Mizuki, who was then given glasses. He also suspected Tamaru, but ended up accusing Ota of being the thief. Ota was forced to reveal the contents of his room, which turned out to be just a prank of Kotarou through a farewell party. The box that was sought after was a gift for the detective, because Kotarou regarded him as a true friend, not just his father's spy. This was the result of Kotarou deducing based on their time together. At school, one of Kotarou's friends frequently fell ill. Kotarou felt sorry and visited him in the health room, bringing some orange. Kotarou was slightly annoyed with his friend for being easily sick, as he thought he should be strong like himself. However, the next day, it was Kotarou who didn't feel well. Kotarou refused to admit he was sick, and suddenly, his friend asked him to accompany him to the health room. Kotarou apologized for mocking him the other day and bought some oranges for a speedy recovery. Not long after, Kotarou was taken for a walk by the lawyer. Kotarou then wanted to see an apartment because the lawyer was planning to move, but it turned out to be Kotarou's old home with his parents. The lawyer accidentally read Kotarou's journal and wanted to show the unique marks of his old residence, and Kotarou was happy because memories with his parents still lingered. Upon returning from the apartment, Kotarou picked up a leaf and was suddenly approached by a group of siblings. They were looking for a leaf because they didn't have money to buy food. The older brother claimed that they had been abandoned by their parents, but Kotarou disagreed with this thought, as he didn't believe that his mother had left him because her last words were, "Stay alive, and one day, Mom will come back." However, in reality, the siblings had indeed been abandoned and were already taken care of by the authorities. As for Kotarou, he became more determined to continue living. Although not with his mother, at least Kotarou had neighbors who often accompanied him to eat traditional snacks. While they were eating, Mizuki received a message from her boyfriend, who was actually just asking for money. The next morning, Kotarou immediately noticed that something was wrong with Mizuki's face. It turned out that the night before, Mizuki wanted to break up with her boyfriend, but ended up being mistreated. Kotarou suggested that Mizuki move to a different apartment, rather than reporting her boyfriend. Kotarou was insistent in his stance, as he didn't agree with reporting Mizuki's boyfriend to the police, based on his father's experience of being a victim of false accusations. In the end, Mizuki decided to move because her boyfriend wasn't arrested despite the report. Mizuki believed that Kotarou was innocent for reporting his father for their mutual well-being. However, she regretted not being able to keep her promise of always being together. After Mizuki moved out, Kotarou tried to hold back his tears. The next day, Kotarou appeared happy because there were plans to watch a movie with his friends. Karino had to take care of the children, including Kotarou, who wanted to watch a samurai anime, while the others wanted to see a dinosaur movie. Although the food prices at the cinema were very high, Karino still bought food for the children. And finally, Karino took Kotarou to watch the samurai anime together. The next day, there was a child with a delinquent appearance named Yuta, who was looking for his father in the apartment complex. It turned out that Yuta was Tamaru's child. Yuta wanted to meet his father, but was always blocked by his mother. Even though Yuta came on his own, his father immediately told him to go home. Tamaru didn't want to meet Yuta unless they had made an agreement. Finally, Yuta was picked up by his mother, and Tamaru promised to meet Yuta at the end of the month. Their apartment also had new neighbors named Take, who seemed strict, but Karino then realized that Take had a fear of children. Moreover, Take was often teased by Kotarou. That night, Karino tried to confirm if Take really disliked children. It turned out that Take did want to be close to them, but she had trauma that made her act sternly. However, Kotarou misunderstood and thought that Take enjoyed being a playmate. So Kotarou continued to invite her to play. As a result, they spun around. However, strangely, Kotarou suddenly looked chubby, but Take felt uncomfortable telling him. Meanwhile, Karino noticed that Kotarou seemed chubbier, but not because he was eating tissues. Shortly after, there was a conversation among the neighbors. It happened that at Kotarou's kindergarten, there was a food inspection. Take, who had knowledge about nutrition, wanted to participate. She was confident that her presence would not be regretted. However, she felt a little remorseful because many students asked Kotarou to finish their meals so they could play outside. Other parents didn't mind as long as their children stayed healthy. Take realized that Kotarou would consume the food in front of him, as he understood the value of food. Fortunately, the kindergarten and parents quickly realized the situation and didn't allow their children to give their leftover food to Kotarou, and finally, this issue was resolved. The next day, Kotarou found a valuable stone that he planned to add the stone to his favorite collection. Kotarou also gave tickets to the neighbors to come to his collection exhibition, which included Karino's drawings, Tonoru's items, and even the gloves that Kotarou's mother had worn while holding him. However, Take got angry and asked for the item to be thrown away, considering her mother's trauma, as she also didn't like touching young Take. But for Kotarou, those gloves were proof that his mother had existed, so he refused to throw them away. Kotarou's condition, which was rarely attended to by his parents, was also noticed by the dentist. The dentist was always attentive to the condition of his patients, especially those under 5 years old. The dentist who had treated Kotarou previously had also once had a young patient. Although the child was examined with his mother, the dentist was surprised to see that many of the child's teeth had cavities. One day, the child came for an unscheduled examination, only given medication and suggestions. The dentist was shocked to find out that the child had actually been abandoned by his parents, which meant that the previous visits were actually cries for help. Since then, the dentist became more attentive to his patients, including Kotarou, who had often experienced dental problems. Fortunately, Kotarou's dental health had improved. Kotarou was known as an independent child. Sometimes, even when it rained, Kotarou offered umbrella services as a bike taxi. His customers were not only Kotarou himself, but also others who had become his regular clients. Every time it rained, there were always people using his service, even to the point of getting his shoulders wet. Kotarou seemed to have a habit of protecting others from the rain, influenced by his father's teachings, who would get wet to shield Kotarou from rain. On the contrary, his mother was often preoccupied with her phone. Currently, Take held the umbrella, sheltering Kotarou from the rain. It appeared that Kotarou was always cared for by the kind people around him. When Kotarou met an old friend from the orphanage named Tasuku, Kotarou also received protection. Karino was left behind because he had to serve his old friend. They began chatting, and they learned Kotarou's address from Ryota, who happened to call to check on Kotarou. Eventually, Tasuku shamelessly asked for a loan. A few days later, Kotarou's lawyer came because he found it strange that Kotarou suddenly asked for additional money. Quickly, Karino suspected who was causing this. On that evening, Karino immediately interrogated Tasuku, and he admitted that Kotarou planned to move apartments and live with him, so he needed extra money. Strangely, Tasuku didn't discuss it with the lawyer beforehand, so the lawyer used his authority to investigate Tasuku's misconduct. Meanwhile, Karino made sure again that Kotarou was indeed planning to move. Looking at his past when he lived in the orphanage, it was convincing because Kotarou was very close to Tasuku, since he was the first person to accept Kotarou at the orphanage. Even though Tasuku had been accused of stealing a wallet, Kotarou still believed that Tasuku wasn't the culprit, even though Tasuku was suspected by other orphanage kids of stealing a box of snacks. However, Tasuku still had a good trait, which was to remind Kotarou not to trust others too easily. As it turned out, the lawyer managed to find out that Tasuku had many online loan debts. The evidence had been found, and it was time to talk to Kotarou directly. However, Kotarou tried to trust him. The lawyer and Karino still had doubts, which was why they confronted Tasuku in front of the apartment, while daringly telling Kotarou to give money so they could move together. Suddenly, Karino got angry because he didn't like it when Kotarou's trust was played with. They decided not to discuss further, especially when Kotarou arrived right on time after collecting cans. They decided to continue the discussion inside. Karino chose to trust his young neighbor's decision. With his own flaws, Tasuku tried to convince them that he wasn't a bad person, and that the person Kotarou regarded as an older brother wouldn't steal his money. Although Kotarou knew that from the beginning that he was being used, but he chose to trust and didn't mind being used by someone he respected. The money given to Tasuku was the result of scavenging because Kotarou believed that they would be able to live together. Finally, Tasuku repented and apologized for using Kotarou as a scapegoat for his problems that were caused by being deceived by others. Fortunately, there were still people who believed in him, like Ryota, who gave him a job, even though he had deceived Kotarou. Meanwhile, Kotarou still enjoyed collecting cans because he had a dream of living with everyone he loved. Touched by the young boy's desire, Karino became more motivated to pursue his career and received an offer to make his comic series a rival to Kagurabachi. However, the editor was worried that Karino wouldn't be able to meet the deadlines while taking care of Kotarou. Unfortunately, not everyone believed it because the one picking up Kotarou today was Akane, Karino's friend. She said that Karino had a lot of work to do, so Kotarou's teacher entrusted a leaflet for a children's performance at kindergarten to be given to Karino. Actually, Karino had set aside time to pick up his young neighbor. However, Kotarou had already been picked up by Akane. The leaflet that should have been given to Karino was also hidden, probably with good intentions by Akane. 3 days ago, Akane stayed in Karino's apartment because she was having an argument with her boyfriend. From there, she found out that Karino had many deadlines but still managed to take care of Kotarou. To ensure his work went smoothly, Akane said that she would take care of Kotarou starting from today. However, this led to a misunderstanding where Kotarou felt like a burden to the person who had once been his rival. Kotarou realized this and didn't want to be accompanied by Karino to school, but Karino still kept his promise. Because work problems could be solved overnight, so he could take Kotarou to school in the morning. Kotarou appeared a bit gloomy because Karino forgot that it was the day of the performance. The mistake also happened because Akane didn't give him the leaflet. Kotarou remained downcast until he saw Karino arriving and giving him a bright smile. Suddenly, Kotarou remembered again that he had become a burden and became sad. This misunderstanding was caused by Akane from the beginning. In fact, Karino never considered Kotarou a burden. On the contrary, Kotarou was the motivation for Karino to complete his comics. Finally, Akane apologized and explained the misunderstanding, and everything ended happily. The scene then showing to the time when Kotarou was still living in the old apartment. One day, Kotarou accidentally rang the doorbell of someone else's house, which turned out to be the house of a kind-hearted designer who was willing to clean Kotarou's dirty clothes. When Kotarou saw one of the clothing designs, he commented sarcastically that the design would never sell. The next day, Kotarou rang the designer's doorbell again with dirty clothes. Kotarou wanted to say something but refrained because the designer seemed upset. Kotarou's habit of often ringing other people's doorbells was not always well received. Sometimes people got angry because they felt disturbed. Therefore, the designer asked him to stop playing with the doorbell. According to his friend, Kotarou didn't intentionally disturb others, but he did it out of loneliness. Lately, there were indeed many cases of neglected children. Before moving to the new apartment, the designer gave Kotarou a clothing gift from his design collection because he was worried that Kotarou's clothes were often dirty. Until now, Kotarou always wore that designed clothing. The next morning, Kotarou appeared annoyed because his newspaper delivery was late. However, Kotarou understood that making a living was tough, so he didn't prolong the issue or get angry. Kotarou subscribed to many newspapers, and he actually read them all. But the newspaper delivery person thought Kotarou was forced to subscribe. Until the newspaper delivery person deliberately came late to get a reaction from Kotarou, and also suggested canceling all subscriptions. However, Kotarou refused. Actually, Kotarou used his abilities to the fullest because he knew that living alone was dangerous. If the newspapers piled up, it meant that Kotarou hadn't taken them, which meant that something had happened to him. The newspaper delivery person will realize, but Kotarou also intentionally subscribed to newspapers to find information about his parents. One day, Kotarou remembered his parents when watching TV, seeing a location that was similar to a place he had been with his mother, until Kotarou asked to be taken to that place with Karino, which irritated him because he woke up late. Not long after, they went by train, guided only by Kotarou's vague memories. They managed to arrive, but Karino was shocked when Kotarou wanted to visit a public cemetery. Kotarou didn't know what his grandparents looked like because they had passed away before he was born. Now, Kotarou wanted to clean their graves and ask the spirits of his grandparents to tell his mother that he was looking for her. Suddenly, Karino's expression changed after spotting the name on the grave, even interrupting Kotarou's prayer, but he refused to tell the reason, because he didn't want Kotarou to see the graves with the exact same names as Kotarou's mother's name. Before they went home, Kotarou once again asked for help from his grandparents to convey to his mother that Kotarou was doing well. Despite the doubt, the words of lie from someone who was always honest made Kotarou happy, because he believed in what Karino said. At the end of the story, everyone gathers. When they go to the graves again, they will go together with Kotarou. Even though Kotarou's parents are no longer with him, and now Kotarou lives alone, but his neighbor's always with him. Moral lesson from the story: never ring someone's doorbell just because you're lonely, or you might end up with a closet full of designer clothes you never wanted.